A New Zealand teachers' disciplinary tribunal struck off former Whangarei Girls' High School teacher April Marie Nordstrom for serious misconduct. She was found to have had an inappropriate sexual relationship with a student and blurred professional boundaries, including late-night messages and overnight stays. Further unprofessional conduct was uncovered from a previous school. Her registration was cancelled, and she was ordered to pay $6,600 in costs.
Today, we're diving into a really difficult but incredibly important topic. What actually happens when a teacher in New Zealand gets accused of misconduct? Now, on the surface, there's a system that's supposed to handle it. But as we're about to see, underneath that surface is a reality that's way more complex and often deeply traumatic for the very people who come forward. I went into this process to try and protect other kids, and I feel like I failed them. Just let that sink in for a second. Those are the words of a woman we're going to call Ellen, and they really just cut to the heart of what's at stake here: the immense personal cost of trying to seek justice. So who's in charge of all this? Well, that would be the New Zealand Teaching Council. They're the professional body responsible for making sure teachers uphold certain standards. So when a teacher's conduct gets called into question, it's their job to step in, investigate, and if they need to, take action. And from the outside looking in, we see them do this. The council's disciplinary tribunal makes these big decisions that have very real consequences. For instance, a teacher named April Marie Nordstrom just had her registration canceled completely for having a sexual relationship with a student. In other cases, teachers have been found guilty of serious misconduct for everything from actions during a manic episode to drinking on the job. It really does look like the system is working, right? But see, that's just the end result we hear about in the news. And this question right here, this is where we need to shift our focus. Because for any of those decisions to happen, someone, a real person, has to find the courage to make a complaint in the first place. What is that journey actually like for them? So let's get back to Ellen. In 2023, she filed a complaint about sexual abuse that happened to her 30 years ago. Now, she wasn't looking for a criminal conviction or anything like that. Her whole goal was just to make sure her former teacher could never, ever work with kids again. But the process she went through, she calls it badly handled and traumatic. In fact, the process itself ended up creating a whole new kind of trauma. Think about this. After she files her complaint online, she gets this unexpected call at work asking for her abuser's address. Then, completely out of the blue, she gets an email with photos of the place where the abuse happened. Just imagine you're trying to go about your day and bam, you're suddenly forced to look at images of the absolute worst moments of your life. That's the kind of re-traumatization she's talking about. And it wasn't a one-time thing, not even close. Over a 4-year period, Ellen had to sit through 10 separate interviews. 10, with 3 different government agencies: the police, the Accident Compensation Corporation, or ACC, and the Teaching Council. Each and every time, she had to relive what happened to her, because it seems like none of these agencies had a good way of just sharing the evidence with each other. And the difference in how she was treated is, well, it's just night and day. She said the police were sympathetic, they were supportive, and they had a really clear process for how they were going to handle her evidence. But with the Teaching Council, she said none of that was true. She felt unsafe and like no one was looking out for her. So you have to wonder, right? Was Ellen's horrible ordeal just a one-off, an unfortunate anomaly, or was it a symptom of a much, much bigger problem? Well, a recent independent review of the Teaching Council seems to suggest it's very much the latter. The review uncovered some pretty serious systemic flaws. It found that a lot of the time, the penalties for dodgy teachers were just too light. It found that some incompetent teachers were just flying under the radar because schools weren't reporting them. And this is the big one. It pointed out major gaps in how victims were treated, specifically noting a real lack of training for investigators who work with survivors of abuse. For Ellen, reading that review was, I'm sure, both gut-wrenching and a huge relief. It basically proves she wasn't crazy, that what she went through was real and systemic, and it just strengthened her resolve. As she says here, it's too late to change what happened to me, but I'm trying to make it less hard for the people to come after me. Okay, now, it's really important to try and understand the incredibly complex position the teaching council is in here. It's not a simple court of law. Its job is way more nuanced than that. The council is what's called a quasi-legal body. So here's the thing. In historical cases like Ellen's, where there's no DNA, no texts, no physical evidence, the bar for a criminal conviction is just too high to meet. In those situations, the teaching council is sometimes the only organization that can step in and stop a potential predator from working with kids ever again. Their role is absolutely vital. And this puts them smack in the middle of a fundamental conflict. On one side, every teacher has the right to natural justice. That means a fair investigation, a fair process. But on the other side, the council's number one job has to be protecting children and making sure the process doesn't cause more harm to victims. In Ellen's view, that balance was tilted way too far in favor of the teacher. So after that damning review and hearing stories like Ellen's, the big question becomes, what is actually being done to fix this? Well, the council has started to respond. The council has come out and publicly acknowledged the issues, and they've promised some pretty significant reforms. They're pledging to seriously improve communication with people who make complaints, and they've even set up a special, dedicated phone line for historical allegations. And this is crucial. They've also committed to assigning investigators who actually have experience in trauma-related cases. On top of that, they're going to try to rely on documents that have already been given to other agencies to hopefully stop that awful cycle of re-traumatization. So these are definitely promising steps on paper, but the damage from a process like this runs deep, not just for the individuals who've been through it, but for the public's faith in the system as a whole. And that leaves us with this final critical question. When justice feels this fractured, what does it truly take to piece it all back together and actually rebuild trust?